The July sun hung heavy over the New Mexico desert, bleaching the landscape into a blur of dust and scrub. Mac Brazel wiped sweat from his brow as he guided his horse across the cracked earth of Foster Ranch, the reins rough in his calloused hands. The air smelled of dry sage and something else, something sharp like scorched metal. Then he saw it. A jagged trench cut through the dirt, as if something had skidded to a violent stop. Scattered along its length were fragments of debris, shimmering faintly in the heat. Brazel dismounted, boots sinking into the loose soil. He picked up a piece lighter than aluminum, smoother than steel. It flexed under his fingers, then snapped back into shape like a living thing. His stomach tightened. The symbols etched into the metal weren't like any writing he'd seen. Not army markings, not factory stamps. Hieroglyphs maybe, but sharper, angular. He turned the fragment over, squinting. No bolts, no seams. Just smooth, unbroken edges where it had sheared apart. Brazel glanced at the horizon, half expecting a jeep or a low-flying plane. But the desert was silent. That evening, he loaded a few pieces into his truck enough to show Sheriff Wilcox in Roswell. Maybe the man would know what to make of it. Brazel wasn't prone to wild ideas, but as he drove, the weight of the debris on the passenger seat felt heavier than it should have been. He didn't say flying saucer when he reached the sheriff's office. Didn't even think it. Just laid the pieces on the desk and watched Wilcox's frown deepen. Military, probably, the sheriff muttered, running a thumb over the strange markings. But I'll wire the base just in case. Brazel nodded. It was 1947. The war was over, but strange things still fell from the sky. Outside, the desert wind howled, carrying the scent of burning. The call from Sheriff George Wilcox reached Roswell Army Airfield before dawn. By mid-morning, a convoy of olive green trucks rumbled across the desert, kicking up dust as they veered off the main road toward Foster Ranch. The 509th Bomb Group, the only atomic strike force in the world, wasn't accustomed to debris retrieval, but the urgency in the sheriff's voice had been unmistakable. Major Jesse Marcel, the 509th's intelligence officer, stepped out of the lead jeep, squinting against the glare. The July heat pressed down like a weight. Around him, soldiers fanned out, cordoning off the area with practiced efficiency. No raised voices, no barked orders, just the quiet precision of men who knew their jobs. Marcel knelt beside the trench Brazel had found. His fingers traced the edges of the scattered wreckage. The metal was unlike anything in the Army's inventory, thin as foil, yet impossibly strong. Some pieces bore those same strange symbols, etched deep as if by a machine, far beyond anything he'd seen. Sir? A corporal held up a fragment that shimmered faintly in the sunlight. This one's different, almost like it's changing shape. Marcel took it, watching as the material flexed under his grip before returning to its original form. Memory mantle, he thought. But that was just a theory, something whispered about in labs, not something that should be lying in a rancher's field. Behind him, Brazel stood with his hat in his hands, watching the soldiers work. A sergeant approached him, voice low but firm. Mr. Brazel, we'll need you to come with us. Just for a statement. Brazel glanced at the debris being loaded onto the trucks carefully, like it might break. Or like it might be listening. Sure. But what in the Sam Hill is this stuff? The sergeant didn't answer. By sundown, the site was picked clean. The soldiers rolled up the barbed wire, packed away their gear. Marcel lingered for a moment, staring at the empty scar in the earth. Whatever had happened here... Back at the base, the wreckage was locked away. Orders came down before Marcel could even file his report. Not to the press, not to their families, and certainly not about the other things they'd found, things that hadn't been metal at all. The morning of July 8, 1947, dawned hot and still in Roswell, at the Roswell Army Airfield. Public Information Officer, Lieutenant Walter Hott, sat at his desk, staring at the press release in his hands. The words had come straight from Colonel William Blanchard himself, typed, signed, and marked for immediate distribution. Halt adjusted his cap and took a deep breath. The base hummed with quiet tension, officers moving briskly through the halls, their expressions unreadable. Outside, the desert sun baked the tarmac, warping the air above it like a mirage. By noon, the news wires crackled to life. The many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday, when the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force, Roswell Army Airfield, was fortunate enough to gain possession of the disc through the cooperation of one of the local ranchers in the sheriff's office of Chaves County. The word spread like wildfire. Reporters from Albuquerque to New York scrambled for confirmation. Phones rang off the hook at the Roswell Daily Record. At the diner on Main Street, farmers and shopkeepers leaned over their coffee cups, voices hushed but buzzing with excitement. Flying disc. Here, Mac Brazel, sitting in a stiff-backed chair at the sheriff's office, heard the news from a deputy. His stomach nodded. He hadn't described the wreckage like that, hadn't even hinted at anything other than strange debris. But the Army had taken the pieces, and now they were calling it a disc. By late afternoon, the mood shifted. A second statement arrived. This one from Fort Worth Army Airfield. Brigadier General Roger Ramey stood before reporters, a crumpled weather balloon at his feet. His smile was tight, practiced. There is no such thing as a flying disc, he said, voice clipped. What was recovered near Roswell was the remains of a radar reflector, part of a high-altitude meteorological device. The earlier announcement was made in error. The retraction landed like a dud shell. In Roswell, the switchboard lit up with calls confused, angry, disbelieving. At the airfield, soldiers exchanged glances but said nothing. Major Marcel, recalled from leave, stood stiffly beside General Ramey during the press conference, his face unreadable. The debris in the photographs didn't match what he'd seen in the desert. The symbols were gone, the strange shifting metal nowhere to be seen. By nightfall, the story was dead. The papers buried it on page 6. The ranchers and mechanics who'd glimpsed the wreckage shrugged. A weather balloon? Sure. But in the shadows of hangars and barracks, whispers lingered. And Mac Brazel, back at Foster Ranch, stared at the empty stretch of dirt where the debris had been. The military had combed every inch, leaving nothing behind. Nothing except questions. The diner on Main Street was packed, the air thick with the scent of coffee and fried eggs. Glenn Dennis, a young mortician who worked at Ballard Funeral Home, leaned against the counter, his fingers drumming restlessly on the chipped formica. He'd heard the rumors everyone had, but last night's radio broadcast had turned whispers into shouts. Flying disc. Recovered by the Army. Then, just as quickly, weather balloon. The waitress, a woman named Lorraine with tired eyes, slid a cup of coffee toward him. You believe any of it, she murmured. Nodding toward the newspaper left open on the counter, Dennis hesitated. He'd gotten a call yesterday from the airfield, a strange one. They'd asked about small, hermetically sealed caskets, about how to preserve bodies exposed to the elements. He'd assumed it was a training exercise, but now, I don't know, he admitted, but something's off. Across the room, a rancher named Bud Payne hunched over his plate, his voice low but carrying. I saw the wreckage before they hauled it off, he said to the man beside him. Not a damn balloon. That metal, you could crumple it in your hand, and it snapped back like nothing happened. A mechanic from the airfield, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, snorted. You're seeing things. Marcel told me himself. It was just radar gear. Dennis sipped his coffee, watching the exchange. Then there was the nurse. She'd come into the funeral home late last night, pale and shaken, still in her uniform from the base infirmary. He'd recognized her, one of the medical staff, though they'd never spoken. Her hands trembled as she asked for formaldehyde. When he pressed, she'd clamped her mouth shut, then muttered something about small bodies. Not human. By morning, she was gone. Transferred, according to the base operator. No forwarding address. Outside, the desert wind rattled the diner's windows. The conversations ebbed and flowed, fractured by doubt and second-guessing. Could have been a test plane. Heard they found creatures gray like kids, but with big eyes. Boo! It was all just wires and foil.
Dennis set down his cup, the coffee gone cold. The military had swarmed Roswell like ants, collecting every scrap, silencing every question. No, the townsfolk were left with pieces of a story that didn't fit together. He wondered, not for the first time, what they'd really found out there in the desert.
And why they were so desperate to make people forget. The classified documents arrived in a plain manila envelope left on Frank Scully's desk while he was out for lunch. The San Francisco Chronicle newsroom hummed with the clatter of typewriters and the murmur of reporters chasing leads. But
Scully's corner was quiet, too quiet. He ran a finger along the envelope's sealed edge. No return address, no postmark. Inside, a single page bore the unmistakable header of the War Department. The text was typed in tight, precise lines, the ink slightly faded. Eyes only. Directive 1744. All recovered materials from Lincoln County, NM, are to be classified TIP secret/magic. Personnel involved are to be reassigned or debriefed under oath of national security. Press inquiries regarding unconventional aircraft are to be redirected to Project Mogul Liaison. No confirmation of extraterrestrial origin is authorized. Scully's pulse quickened. He'd been chasing UFO stories since Arnold's sighting over Mount Rainier, but this was different. Official. He flipped the page, but the back was blank. No signatures, no stamps, just orders, cold and unequivocal. That evening, the phone rang. A voice clipped and unfamiliar. You got the memo, Mr. Scully. Best to let sleeping dogs lie. The line went dead. Scully sat in the dim glow of his desk lamp, the document burning a hole in his briefcase. He'd heard whispers before sources who clammed up mid-interview, researchers who suddenly changed their tune. But this was the first time the warning had been so direct.
The next morning, he drove to the Chronicle's archives, digging through back issues of aerospace journals. Project Mogul was buried in a footnote from 1946 to dash a classified Army Air Forces program using high-altitude balloons to detect Soviet atomic tests.
The diagrams showed arrays of microphones and radar reflectors. Strange but mundane. Nothing like the debris Brazel had described. Yet the military had retracted the flying disc story within hours. Why? His editor, a grizzled veteran of the Hearst era, leaned over his shoulder. You're digging in the wrong hole, Frank.
Try Hangar 84. Where's that? Right field. Ohio. The editor lit a cigarette, exhaling slowly.
Buddy of mine in logistics says that's where they shipped the Roswell wreckage. Whole damn hangar's locked down tighter than Fort Knox. Scully scribbled the name in his notebook. That night, he placed a call to Dayton, Ohio, asking for a Colonel Albert DeArmond, a name he'd found in an old press release about experimental aircraft. The voice that answered wasn't DeArmond's. You're wasting your time, Scully. It said, there's no story here. A click. Dial tone. Outside his apartment window, a black sedan idled at the curb, its engine barely audible. Scully drew the blinds. The documents on his desk seemed to pulse with quiet menace. He thought of Brazel, whisked away by the military for debriefing, of the nurse who'd vanished, of Marcel's tight-lipped press conference, where the debris in the photos didn't match what he'd held in his hands. The cover-up wasn't just about hiding the truth. It was about making sure no one knew what questions to ask. Frank Scully's typewriter keys stuck in the July humidity as he hammered out his notes. The ceiling fan above him groaned, doing little to dispel the heat or the unease that had settled in his bones. His apartment smelled of stale coffee and cigarette smoke, the ashtray overflowing with half-smoked Luckies. He reread the anonymous tip that had arrived that morning. A single line scrawled on a scrap of paper slipped under his door. Ask about the bodies. Hangar 84. They're not ours. Scully exhaled sharply. He'd spent the day chasing shadows calling contacts at Wright Field, pressing old sources in the Pentagon. Every door had slammed shut. His last lead, a clerk in the Air Materiel Command, had hung up mid-sentence after whispering, "They're listening." Outside, a car engine turned over. Scully froze.
then edged toward the window, peeling back the curtain just enough to see the street below. The black sedan was still there, parked across from his building. No plates. He reached for the phone, dialing the Chronicle's night desk. The line crackled, then went dead. A soft knock at his door. Scully's breath hinged. He wasn't expecting any. The knock came again, measured, deliberate. Who is it? No answer. He grabbed the fireplace poker beside the hearth, its weight cold in his palm. The knock sounded a third time, louder now. Scully inched forward, peering through the fisheye lens. The hallway was empty. When he opened the door, a manila envelope identical to the first lay on the threshold. Inside, a single photograph, a blurry image of a hangar interior, its contents obscured by tarps. A figure in a lab coat stood beside what might have been a gurney. The shape beneath the covering was too small to be human. Scully's hand shook. He flipped the photo over. On the back, another scrawl. Burn this. They know. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Scully snapped his head up, catching a glimpse of the figure retreating around the corner, tall, broad-shouldered, hat pulled low. He lunged for the door, but by the time he reached the stairwell, the building was silent. Back inside, he locked the door and slid the chain into place. His pulse roared in his ears. He stuffed the photo into his briefcase, then hesitated. The black sedan was gone. That should have been a relief. It wasn't. The next morning, Scully drove to a diner on the outskirts of town. The kind of place where the coffee was strong and no one asked questions. His contact, a retired sergeant named Ed Doyle, sat in the back booth, his face half hidden by a newspaper. "You're digging where you shouldn't, Doyle," muttered as Scully slid in across from him. The man's knuckles were scarred, his eyes darting to the door every few seconds. "Tell me about Hangar 84, Scully said, keeping his voice low.
Doyle's jaw tightened. He folded the newspaper to reveal a grainy photo soldiers loading a top-covered crate onto a flatbed truck.
That's from Fort Worth, July 9, 47. Same day Ramey called it a weather balloon. He tapped the crate. "That's no balloon. What's inside?" Doyle leaned closer. "You ever hear of Operation Paperclip?" Scully nodded. "The program that brought Nazi scientists to the U.S. after the war. Some of those eggheads worked on things even Hitler didn't know about," Doyle said. "Flying wings, stealth tech, stuff that looks otherworldly." He glanced around again. What if Roswell wasn't alien, Scully? What if it was us testing something we stole from the Germans and the Reds got wind of it? Scully's mind raced. A staged crash. A deliberate leak to mislead Soviet spies. It fit the timeline, the secrecy, the sudden retraction. "Then why threaten me?" he asked. Doyle's smile was grim, because the best lies need believers. Outside, the car slowed near the diner's entrance. Doyle stiffened, then tossed $1 on the table. "I've said too much. Wait, who were the bodies?" Doyle paused at the door. "Ever hear of the V2 experiments? Prisoners didn't always survive." He touched his hat in farewell. "Watch your back, reporter." The bell jingled as he left. Scully stared at his coffee, the dregs swirling like ink. The pieces fit too well, but as he stepped into the parking lot, he noticed the black sedan idling 2 blocks down. The man inside was watching him. The diner in Washington, D.C. was a relic of the war years. Vinyl booze cracked with age, the air thick with the scent of grease and stale tobacco. Colonel Richard Latham, Rat, sat in the corner, his uniform replaced by a rumpled suit, but his posture still rigid with military precision. His hands, gnarled with arthritis, wrapped around a coffee cup as Frank Scully slid into the seat across from him. "You're persistent, I'll give you that," Latham muttered. His voice was gravel, worn down by decades of cigarettes and classified briefings. Most reporters would have dropped this after the first warning. Scully set his notebook on the table. "Most reporters don't get sent classified memos by mistake." Latham's eyes flicked to the door, then back. "No such thing as a mistake in this business." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "You ought to know about Roswell? Fine, but you won't like the answer." Outside, rain pattered against the diner's fogged windows.
A bus rumbled past, its headlights cutting through the gloom. Latham tapped the rim of his cap.
July 47. The Soviets were sniffing around our atomic program like dogs at a butcher's door. We needed to know if they got word of something unusual. How would they react?
How would the band? Public? He smirked, a bitter twist of his lips. So he gave them a show. Scully's pen hovered over the page.
You're saying the crash was staged, not the crash. The story. Latham pulled a folded photograph from his jacket. A grainy shot of a balloon array. Its sensors dangling like strange fruit.
Project Mogul. Classified, yeah, but not exactly alien tech.
We let a few pieces slip into the wrong hands, fed the flying disc rumor to the press, then yanked it back. Watched the hysteria spread. And the bodies, Latham's expression darkened.
You ever hear of the Horton Ho 229? Nazi stealth prototypes.
We shipped what was left of the pilot's stateside burn beyond recognition. Perfect for a little
theater. He crumpled the photo in his fist. The Soviets bought it. So did half of America. Scully's stomach turned. The witnesses, the nurse, transfer. Debriefed, Latham's gaze was flint. This wasn't some backwoods cover-up, son. This was strategy.
You think the Reds weren't running their own psyops? We needed the edge. A waitress refilled their coffees, her smile oblivious to the tension.
When she left, Scully exhaled sharply. So it was all a lie. Latham shrugged. Does it matter? Fear was real. Distraction worked. He dropped $1 on the table and stood.
But here's the kicker. Even we didn't know everything. Some of those reports, the ones they buried deepest,
those came from places even Mogul couldn't explain. He adjusted his hat, casting a shadow over his face. Truth's a funny thing, Scully. Sometimes the lie's so good it becomes true. The bell above the door jingled as he left. Scully stared at his notes, the words blurring together. Outside, the black sedan was gone, but the rain kept falling, relentless and cold. The film reel arrived in a plain brown package, postmarked London, 1995. No return address. The label bore only a single word, Santilli.
Ray Santilli, a British music producer with a side interest in UFO lore, spliced the grainy footage onto his projector with trembling hands. The screen flickered to life, revealing a sterile room, white tiles, harsh overhead lights.
A figure in a surgical mask leaned over a table, their gloved hands obscuring the subject beneath them. Then the camera panned down. The creature on the table was small, no more than 4 feet long. Its skin was grayish-white, stretched taut over a skeletal frame. The head was oversized, the eyes black and almond-shaped, the mouth a thin slit.
One arm lay at an unnatural angle, as if broken during impact. The chest cavity had been split open, revealing organs that glistened under the light, strange, gelatinous masses, unlike anything in a human anatomy textbook.
Santilli's breath caught. He'd seen autopsy photos before, but this was different.
The footage had the weight of authenticity, the shaky camera work, the muffled voices of the medical team, the way the scalpel hesitated before making the first incision. But something nagged at him.
The film was too clean for 1947. The gloves looked modern. The edges of the frame bore marks of editing, subtle but there. He rewound the tape, freezing on a close-up of the creature's hand. 6 fingers, no nails. The skin appeared almost synthetic under the light. The phone rang, a voice thick with a British accent. You've seen it then. Santilli swallowed. Who is this? Doesn't matter. What matters is what you do next. Pause. That film's worth millions. Or it's worth nothing. Depends on who believes it. The line went dead. Santilli played the footage again, frame by frame. In the background, a calendar hung on the wall blurred, but the number 47 was visible. July or 1947? He called the only person he trusted to verify it, doctors say. Robert Hastings, a UFO researcher with military contacts. Hastings arrived within the hour, his expression unreadable as he studied the film. Where'd you get this? Anonymous source, Santilli admitted. You think it's real?
Hastings rewound to the creature's face. I've heard stories. Nurses at Roswell talking about small beings in the infirmary. But this? He zoomed in. The creature's left eye was damaged, the socket hollow. If this is a hoax, it's the best one I've ever seen. And if it's not, Hastings didn't answer. By morning, the film was the only thing anyone was talking about. News vans crowded outside Santilli's studio. Experts weighed in, some calling it definitive proof, others pointing to inconsistencies. The gloves were wrong for the era. The film stock, too pristine. The creature's anatomy didn't match any known biological model. But then a retired Air Force pathologist, Dr. Roger Lear, came forward. I've performed autopsies, he told CNN. That footage, it's either the real deal or someone with medical training faked it. Santilli sat in his office, the phone ringing off the hook. The package had contained no note, no instructions, just the film. And the unshakable feeling that he was being watched. That night, he locked the original reel in a safe. As he turned out the lights, a shadow moved across his window, a figure in a dark coat, lingering just out of sight. The film was out now, and so were the questions. Who had leaked it, and why? The phone call came at 3:17 a.m. Ray Santilli jolted awake, the receiver cold against his ear. Static hissed, then a voice mechanically distorted as if run through a filter. You're asking the wrong questions, Mr. Santilli. Santilli's grip tightened. Who is this? The film is real, but not what you think. A pause, the hum of a scrambled line. Ask about Hangar 18. Ask about the Horton. The call disconnected. Santilli sat in the dark, his pulse hammering. He'd spent the last week defending the autopsy footage, debunking claims of special effects, dismissing accusations of a hoax. But this wasn't a skeptic. This was a warning. The next morning, he met with a retired aerospace engineer named Carl Brunner in a cafe near Gatwick Airport. Brunner, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers, had worked on declassified British-German aircraft projects after the war. He slid a manila folder across the table without a word. Inside, schematics of a flying wing, its design unmistakably German. Horton Ho 229, Brunner muttered, stirring his tea. Nazi stealth prototype. Could evade radar. Allies captured the plans in 45. By 47, we were testing our own version. Santilli frowned. What's this got to do with the film? Brunner tapped a faded photo tucked behind the schematics a hangar, its contents shrouded in tarps. Roswell wasn't aliens. It was us, testing something we didn't want the Soviets to see. He leaned in. But here's the kicker, some of those test pilots. They weren't human-sized. Santilli's stomach dropped. The film's real, Brunner continued. But it's not extraterrestrial. It's experimental. A crash test dummy, bioengineered to withstand G-forces. Or worse, a prisoner from the camps. The Nazis did things we're still uncovering. Outside, a black sedan rolled past the cafe, slowing near the curb. Brunner's eyes flicked toward it, then back. He snapped the folder shut. They leaked that footage to you for a reason. To muddy the waters. To make the truth look like a fantasy. He stood abruptly, dropping a 10-pound note on the table. Ask yourself, who benefits if everyone's chasing little green men? The bell above the door jingled as Brunner left. Santilli stared at the schematics, the implications settling like lead in his gut. The phone call. The hangar. The Horton. What if the whistleblower was right? What if the autopsy was a distraction? He stepped outside, the autumn wind biting through his jacket. The black sedan was gone, but the questions remained. The nursing home smelled of antiseptic and overcooked peas. Dr. Eleanor Voss adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses as she signed the visitor log, her fingers trembling slightly. The receptionist barely glanced up, just another academic poking around for old stories. Room 214 was at the end of a dimly lit hallway, the door slightly ajar. Inside, an elderly woman sat by the window, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Naomi Self, or at least the name she'd been using since 1947. Mrs. Self? Eleanor kept her voice soft, non-threatening. My name is Dr. Voss. I'm researching medical history in New Mexico. I was hoping to ask you a few questions. The woman's gaze drifted toward her.
Cloudy with cataracts, but sharp with something else caution.
You're not. With the government. A statement, not a question. Eleanor sat in the chair opposite her, setting her recorder on the table between them. No. Just a researcher. Naomi exhaled through her nose, a sound like dry leaves rustling. They told me never to talk about it. Said it was treason. Eleanor leaned forward. About Roswell? A flicker in the old woman's eyes. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant hum of a television down the hall. Then, so quiet Eleanor almost missed it. I was at the base infirmary. July 9th, 47. They brought them in after midnight. Eleanor's pulse quickened. She didn't press. Let the silence do the work. Naomi's fingers twitched, as if remembering the weight of the scalpel. 3 of them. Small, grayish skin, like wet clay. Big heads. No hair. She swallowed. Their eyes black. No whites at all. Eleanor's pen hovered over her notebook. Alive? One was. Barely. Naomi's voice dropped to a whisper. It made sounds, not words. Like... high-pitched. Hurt my ears. The window rattled in its frame. A gust of wind shaking the glass. Eleanor resisted the urge to glance behind her. What did they have you do? Naomi's jaw tightened. Draw blood. Tissue samples. The organs weren't right. No stomach. Just a sac, like a jellyfish. She shuddered. Then the men in suits came. Took everything. Told us we'd be charged if we talked. Eleanor hesitated. And after. Transferred me to Okinawa 2 days later. A bitter smile. Convenient, huh? The door creaked. A nurse poked her head in, smiling too brightly. Everything all right in here? Naomi's posture shifted instantly, her face smoothing into vacant pleasantry. Just reminiscing, dear. The nurse's eyes flicked to the recorder. Eleanor clicked it off. We're done. When the nurse left, Naomi grabbed Eleanor's wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. They'll come for you too. They always do. Eleanor pried free gently. Who? But Naomi had retreated again. Her gaze drifting back to the window, the ones who make people disappear. Outside, a black sedan rolled slowly past the nursing home driveway. Eleanor didn't notice. She was too busy writing. The next morning, Eleanor's hotel room had been searched. Nothing was taken. Nothing obvious disturbed. But her notes were out of order. The recorder's battery was dead, though she'd charged it overnight. And when she called the nursing home, the receptionist sounded genuinely confused. Naomi self? No one by that name's ever been here, Doctor. Eleanor stood in the empty parking lot, the desert sun burning her neck. The recorder in her bag suddenly felt like a brick. She played back the interview. Static. Then, clear as day, Naomi's voice. They'll come for you too. A click. Silence. Eleanor turned the recorder over. The tape was gone. In its place, a single word scrawled on a slip of paper. Run. The obituary in the Roswell Daily Record was brief, tucked between a livestock auction notice and a church bake sale. William MacBrazel, 65, passed suddenly on June 15, 1963. Survived by his son and 2 grandchildren. Private services held. No cause of death. No mention of the summer of 1947. Dr. Eleanor Voss circled the notice with a red pen, her hands steady despite the knot in her stomach. Brazil's name was the 7th on her list. 7 witnesses, 7 deaths, all under circumstances just plausible enough to avoid scrutiny. A car crash. A heart attack. A hunting accident. She spread the clippings across her motel room desk, the yellowed paper brittle under her fingers. Glenn Dennis, the mortician who'd spoken of Small. Caskets had died in a single-vehicle rollover on Highway 285 in 1964. No skid marks. No witnesses. But Payne, the rancher who described the strange metal, succumbed to a stroke at 52. His widow claimed he'd been receiving strange phone calls in the weeks before. Even Frank Scully, the journalist who chased the Hangar 84 lead, had been found dead in his apartment in 1964 officially a suicide, though his colleagues swore he'd been working on a breakthrough. His notes were never recovered. Eleanor tapped her pen against the desk. Coincidence was one thing. A pattern was another. She opened her laptop, pulling up a military database she wasn't supposed to have access to. A search for Project Mobile personnel yielded a dozen names: engineers, meteorologists, soldiers. Half had redacted service records. The others had obituaries as tidy as Brazel's. One name stood out: Major Jesse Marcel. The intelligence officer who'd first examined the debris had died in 1986. His death certificate listing natural causes. But his son, Jesse Jr., had spent decades insisting his father had been silenced. Eleanor dialed the number she'd scribbled in her notebook. The line rang twice before a gruff voice answered. Marcel, Mr. Marcel. This, Dr. Eleanor Voss. I'm researching. I know who you are. A pause. Static crackled, or maybe it was the wind. You're digging where you shouldn't. Eleanor gripped the phone tighter. Your father's testimony contradicts the official record. I think he knew the truth. A bitter laugh. Truth's got a funny way of killing people, Doctor. Then tell me before it's too late. Silence. Then, so quiet she almost missed it. Meet me at the old Foster Ranch gate. Midnight. Come alone. The call ended. Eleanor stared at the motel's thin curtains, the streetlight outside, casting long shadows. She'd interviewed enough witnesses to know the risks, but Marcel Jr. was the last living link to the first men on the scene. She packed her recorder, flashlight, and a .38 revolver she'd bought at a pawn shop in Albuquerque, just in case. The desert at night was a different world, silent, vast. The stars unnaturally bright. Eleanor parked her rental car a mile from the rendezvous point, hiking the rest of the way under a sliver of moon. The ranch gate was rusted, the woods splintered with age. Jesse Marcel Jr. stood in the shadows, his face gaunt under a battered Stetson. He didn't offer his hand. You're late. Eleanor caught her breath. I had to make sure I wasn't followed. Marcel's smile didn't reach his eyes. They don't follow. They're already here. A chill ran down her spine. Who? Instead of answering, he pulled a folded photograph from his jacket. The edges were singed, the image grainy. Soldiers loading a top-covered stretcher into a truck. The shape beneath the fabric was too small to be human. My father took this the night of the recovery, Marcel said. They made him burn the rest. This one slipped through. Eleanor's pulse pounded in her ears. What's under the tarp? Marcel's jaw tightened. You tell me. You've seen the autopsy film. She had. But staring at the photo, the reality of it hit her like a freight train. They're real. Or someone wanted us to think they were. Marcel glanced over her shoulder toward the distant glow of Roswell. You ever hear of Operation Paperclip? Nazi scientists brought over after the war. Some worked on things even Hitler didn't know about. Eleanor frowned. You're saying this was a German craft. I'm saying the truth's worse than aliens. Marcel pressed the photo into her hand. They'll come for you next. They always do. A coyote howled in the distance. Marcel stiffened, then turned toward the darkness. Time to go. Wait, who's they? But Marcel was already walking away, his figure dissolving into the night. Eleanor stood alone, the photograph burning in her grip. The wind picked up, carrying the faint hum of an engine, not a coyote. A car, idling just out of sight. She ran. The motel room was untouched. No broken locks, no disturbed papers. But the air smelled faintly of cigarettes, though Eleanor didn't smoke. She shoved her notes into a bag, hands shaking. The photograph was gone. She'd hidden it in her boot, but now her pockets were empty. The phone rang. Eleanor froze. No one knew she was here. She lifted the receiver. Static. Then a voice, mechanized, inhuman. Stop digging, Doctor. The line went dead. Outside, a black sedan rolled past her window, its headlights off. Eleanor didn't sleep that night.
By dawn, she was on the road, but not toward home.
She had one last lead, and she wasn't going to disappear like the others.
The National Archives reading room was hushed, the air thick with the scent of aged paper and disinfectant.
Dr. Eleanor Voss adjusted her glasses as she scrolled through the newly digitized files on the microfilm reader. The label read Project Mogul, Volume Tart. 4 classified appendices, but the contents were anything but mundane. Redaction black bars slashed across entire paragraphs, leaving only fragments. Unusual debris field.
Anomalous material properties. Recovery team reported biological specimens of unknown. Eleanor's pulse quickened. She'd spent months petitioning for access under the Freedom of Information Act. And now here it was. The government's own admission that something had crashed in the New Mexico desert in 1947.
A shadow fell across the desk. The archivist, a gaunt man with a security badge clipped to his lapel, placed a second folder beside her.
"You'll want to see this too?" he murmured. "Just declassified last week. The file was thin, its edges brittle."
The cover sheet bore the stamp of the Air Materiel Command, Wright-Patterson AFB, dated July 1947. Inside, a single memo stood out. Eyes only revisue Operation Roswell. NM debris analysis confirms unconventional construction. See attached lab report. Material exhibit shape memory properties and isotopic ratios inconsistent with terrestrial manufacturing. No identifiable propulsion system located. Recommend immediate top secret/magic classification pending joint. Chief's review. Biological specimens transported to Hangar 18 for evaluation.
Preliminary examination suggests non-human origin, though Soviet involvement cannot be ruled out. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she turned the page.
The attached lab report was missing only a placeholder slip marked removed per NSC Directive 12 to 47 inches. She glanced up.
The archivist was watching her, his expression unreadable. "Where's the rest?"
He shrugged. Some secrets even the archives can't keep. That evening, in a dimly lit motel room outside D.C., Eleanor spread the documents across the bed. The 1994 GOO report on Roswell lay open to its key finding. Air Force investigation concludes debris recovered in 1947 likely originated from Project Mogul, a classified balloon array designed to detect Soviet atomic tests. However, witness testimonies regarding small bodies remain unsubstantiated by available records. She traced the words with a fingertip, unsubstantiated, not debunked. Her laptop screen glowed with an email from a retired Air Force pilot she tracked down, a man named Colonel Robert Durant, who'd flown cargo runs out of Wright-Patterson in the 1950s. His response was terse. They called it the Icebox. Hangar 18, Sublevel 3. I never saw what was inside, but the guards carried sidearms even in a secure facility. One night in '52, we airlifted crates to Norton AFB lead line with radiation warnings. Manifest said medical supplies. The weight was all wrong. Eleanor chewed her lip. She pulled up another document, a FOIA-released flight log from July 1947. One entry stood out as C-54 Skymaster departing Roswell AF on July 9th, destination Wright Field. The cargo column simply read Equipment. The next page was a personnel roster for the 509th Bomb Group. Half the names were redacted, but one line was startlingly clear. Marcel, Jesse A., Maja Debris Analysis Team Lead, reassigned August 1947. Alaska, reassigned. She reached for her phone, dialing a number she'd memorized. The line rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Stanton Friedman here. Eleanor exhaled. The nuclear physicist turned ufologist was the closest thing the field had to a legend. Dr. Friedman? It's Eleanor Voss. I think I found proof the government's still hiding something. A pause. Then, quietly. Of course they are. But be careful what you call proof. She told them about the files, the isotopic ratios, the missing lab report, the icebox. Friedman's sigh crackled through the line. I've seen similar papers. They're breadcrumbs, Eleanor. Enough to make you ask questions, never enough to answer them. What about the bodies? Another pause. You ever hear of Operation Paperclip? Eleanor's stomach twisted.
You think the biological specimens were Nazi experiments. I think, Friedman said slowly, that the truth is messy. Maybe it was aliens. Maybe it was something we made. Either way, they don't want us to know. Outside, a car door slammed.
Eleanor peered through the curtains. A black sedan idled at the far end of the parking lot. Friedman's voice turned urgent. Listen to me.
Scan those documents and email them to yourself.
Now. She did. Fingers flying across the keyboard.
As the files uploaded, she glanced back outside. The sedan hadn't moved.
Got them?
Yes, but good. Now burn the originals. Eleanor froze.
What? Burn them. If they're coming, you can't let those papers be found on you. The line went dead. Eleanor stared at the documents, the first real evidence she'd ever held. Then she reached for the motel's ashtray and a book of matches.
Flames caught fast, turning the memos to ash in seconds. Through the smoke, she watched the sedan's headlights flick on.
It didn't drive away. It just sat there, waiting. The next morning, the archives had no record of the files Eleanor described. The archivist didn't recognize her, and the email she'd sent herself, message not found. The sedan was gone, and so she realized with a chill, it was her laptop's hard drive, wiped clean. The truth was out there, but it wasn't hers anymore.
The diner outside Dayton, Ohio, was a relic of the 1950s dash-red vinyl booths, chrome trim dulled by time, the air thick with the scent of coffee and fried onions. Eleanor Voss sat in the corner, her fingers wrapped around a mug gone cold.
Across from her, retired Colonel Jack Turner leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't look like the others," he said, his eyes flicking toward the door.
The UFO nuts, I mean. You look like someone who actually wants the truth. Eleanor kept her expression neutral. I've read the declassified files.
Project Mogul, the weather balloon story. She tapped the folder on the table between them copies of the documents she burned, reconstructed from memory. But I know that's not the whole story. Turner exhaled through his nose. It sounded like steam escaping a valve. Mogul was real. So were the balloons. But Roswell? He shook his head. That was something else. Outside, a truck rumbled past, its headlights cutting through the evening gloom.
The diner's neon sign flickered, casting Turner's face in jagged shadows. I flew experimental aircraft out of Wright-Patterson in '47, he said, lowering his voice further.
We had a hanger off the books. Called it the Icebox. Not because it was cold. Because what was inside? Well, you didn't talk about it. Eleanor's pulse quickened. What was inside? Turner hesitated, then reached into his jacket. He slid a photograph across the table, grainy, black and white, edges singed as if rescued from a fire. It showed a hangar interior, its contents obscured by tarps.
A figure in a lab coat stood beside a table, their gloved hands hovering over a small, shrouded form. We called them the guests, Turner muttered.
Not because they were welcome. Eleanor's breath caught. The shape under the top was too small to be human. Turner's fingers trembled as he pulled the photo back. I was just a pilot. They never told me what they were, where they came from. But I know this. Those things weren't from here. A waitress refilled their coffees, her smile oblivious to the tension. When she left, Eleanor leaned in. Then why the weather balloon cover-up? Why not just say it was a classified aircraft? Turner's lips curled into a bitter smile. Because the best lies are the ones people want to believe. A balloon? Boring. The flying saucer? Crazy. But somewhere in the middle, he shrugged. That's where the real secrets hide. He drained his coffee, then set the mug down with finality. Look, Doctor, you seem smart.
So here's my advice. Stop digging.
The files they've declassified. They're bait. The real truth? That's buried where no FOIA request will ever reach it. Eleanor didn't flinch. I need to hear it from someone who was there. Turner studied her for a long moment. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. Hangar 18.
Sub-level 3. Ask about the Horton. The bell above the door jingled as a group of truckers wandered in, laughing loudly.
Turner took the opportunity to stand. dropping a $10 bill on the table. "One last thing," he said, adjusting his cap. "That photo doesn't exist."
And neither does this conversation. Then he was gone, melting into the night like smoke. Eleanor sat frozen, the din of the diner fading around.
Her. The photograph was gone. Turner had taken it with him. But the image was seared into her mind.
The top, the small, still form beneath it. She reached for her notebook, scribbling furiously. Hangar 18, sublevel 3, the Horton.
Outside, a black sedan idled at the far end of the parking lot, its engine barely audible over the rain. Eleanor didn't notice. She was already making plans. The call came at 2:13 a.m. Eleanor jolted awake, the motel phone shrill in the silence.
A voice, rasping and thin. You were right. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. Colonel Turner, a wet cough. Then, labored breathing. They knew I talked to you. She sat bolt upright. Where are you? Doesn't matter. A shuddering inhale. Listen. The Horton, it wasn't just a plane. The Nazis, they were working on pilots, not men. Something else. Eleanor's grip on the phone tightened. What kind of pilots? Static hissed. When Turner spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper.
The kind that don't need oxygen.
A thud. A gasp. Then the line went dead. Eleanor sat in the dark, the receiver clutched in her hand. Outside, the rain had stopped. The parking lot was silent. The black sedan was gone, but on the nightstand, a single slip of paper lay where none had been before. 2 words, scrawled in shaky handwriting. They're coming. The next morning, the Dayton Daily News carried a brief obituary. Retired Air Force Colonel Jack Turner, 89, passed peacefully in his sleep last night. A decorated pilot. Turner served in World War II and the Korean War. Private burial at Arlington National Cemetery. No mention of the struggle. No signs of foul play. Just another old soldier, gone in the night. Eleanor stood at the motel window. The newspaper crumpled in her fist. The sun rose over Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in the distance, its runways gleaming like steel. She knew what she had to do. But first, she needed to disappear. The hospice room smelled of antiseptic and stale air. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, the only sound breaking the silence. Dr. 2. Eleanor Voss stood in the doorway, gripping a notebook like a lifeline. The man in the bed, Thomas Whitaker, a retired aeronautical engineer, was skeletal under the thin blanket, his breathing shallow. His eyes, though, were sharp. "You came," he rasped. Eleanor pulled up a chair. "You said you had something to tell me." Whitaker coughed, a wet, rattling sound. Not much time left. Might as well spit it out. He gestured weakly to a glass of water on the bedside table. Eleanor helped him take a sip. "I worked at Wright-Patterson from 46 to 52, he said, his voice gaining strength. "Hangar 18, sublevel 3. You know what that means?" Eleanor nodded. "The icebox." Whitaker's lips twitched in a grim smile. Clever girl. He shifted, wincing. They brought the wreckage in July 47. Not just metal things. Small, gray. Not human. Not Nazi experiments either. Eleanor's pen hovered over her notebook. "You saw them?" "Saw?" "I studied them." His fingers plucked at the blanket. The tissue samples no cellular structure like ours. No new nuclei. Just strands. Like nothing on Earth. The heart monitor beeped steadily. Eleanor leaned closer. "Why lie about the weather balloon?" Whitaker exhaled. "Because the truth was worse. If the public knew we weren't alone, that we had proof, it would have caused panic."
And the Soviets? He trailed off, his gaze drifting to the window. We were already on the brink.
Imagine if they thought we'd recovered alien tech. Eleanor frowned. The Project Mogul was real, but it wasn't Roswell. Whitaker coughed again, harder this time. The debris we analyzed? Isotopes didn't match anything in our periodic table. The metal, you could fold it, crumple it, and it'd snap back like nothing happened.
No tool we had could cut it. He reached under his pillow, pulling out a yellowed photograph. The edges were burned, the image grainy a lab table, a sheet-draped form. Too small to be human. Eleanor's throat tightened. You kept this? Insurance. Whitaker's hand trembled as he handed it over. They declassified Mogul to bury the real story. But this? This was never supposed to exist. The door creaked open. A nurse stepped in, her smile polite but firm. Time for your medication, Mr. Whitaker. Whitaker's grip on Eleanor's wrist tightened suddenly, his nails biting into her skin. Listen to me. The crash wasn't in 47. It was 48. They backdated everything, files, reports, witness statements. The whole timeline's a lie. The nurse approached with a syringe. Whitaker's voice dropped to a whisper. Find the real files. Look for Majestic 12. Then his grip slackened. The nurse injected the medication, and within seconds, his eyelids fluttered shut. Eleanor stood, tucking the photograph into her jacket. The nurse didn't meet her gaze as she left. Outside, the parking lot was empty. No black sedan, no watchers. Just the desert wind howling like a thing alive. She got in her car and drove, Whitaker's words echoing in her skull. Majestic 12, a name she'd only seen in conspiracy forums. A ghost in the archives. But if it was real, if the crash had happened in 48, not 47 dash, then every document, every testimony was part of the cover-up. And the truth was still out there, waiting.
The lecture hall at the University of New Mexico hummed with restless energy. Dr. Eleanor Voss stood at the podium, her notes spread before her, the projector screen behind her displaying a split image on one side, the 1947 Roswell Daily Record headline proclaiming a captured flying disc. On the other, the retraction declaring it a weather balloon. The audience, journalists, academics, and UFO enthusiasts leaned forward in their seats. For decades, Eleanor began, her voice steady. The Roswell incident has been a battleground between belief and skepticism. But the real question isn't whether something crashed in the desert. It's what crashed and why the government has gone to such lengths to obscure the truth. She clicked to the next slide, A, declassified memo from Project Mogul. Its redaction stark against yellowed paper. Skeptics argue that Roswell was a classified balloon array, part of a program to detect Soviet nuclear tests. She gestured to a man in the front row, Philip Klass, a well-known debunker, his arms crossed, and they're right about Mogul's existence. But Mogul doesn't explain the witness testimonies, the missing files, or the bodies. Klass scoffed. Witnesses misremember. Files get lost. Bodies, pure fantasy. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Eleanor clicked again. The screen now showed a side-by-side comparison, the Santilli autopsy film, and a diagram of a Horton Ho 229 cockpit. Then there's the Nazi connection, she continued. Operation Paperclip brought German scientists to the U.S. after the war. Some worked on advanced craft that could be mistaken for something otherworldly. Stanton Friedman, sitting beside Klass, shook his head. You're ignoring the isotopic evidence. The debris analyzed at Wright-Patterson didn't match any known terrestrial material. And the witnesses, nurses, soldiers, they didn't describe test pilots. They described beings. Eleanor. Let the tension hang. She clicked to the final slide, Thomas Whitaker's photograph. Blurred but unmistakable. The small, sheet-draped form on the lab table. Here's what we know, she said. The military recovered. Something in 1947 or maybe 1948. They lied about it. They silenced witnesses, and they're still lying. She paused. But was it aliens? A Soviet psyop? A Nazi experiment gone wrong. She looked out at the audience. The truth is, we may never know for sure. Because the only thing more dangerous than a secret is the people willing to kill for it. The room erupted, some clapping, some shouting objections. A reporter stood, voice cutting through the noise. So what's your verdict, Doctor? Truth or lie? Eleanor hesitated. Then, softly, both. The projector flickered off, plunging the room into sudden darkness. Outside, a black sedan idled at the curb.
its windows tinted against the afternoon sun. Eleanor didn't see it. She was already packing her notes, the weight of 70 years of questions pressing down on her like a stone. The truth was out there, but so were the lies. And in Roswell, the line between them had always been razor thin.
The desert wind howled through the empty streets of Roswell, rattling the neon sign outside the International UFO Museum and Research Center. Inside, tourists shuffled past exhibits, grainy photographs, newspaper clippings, a life-size diorama of an alien autopsy.
A child pressed her nose against the glass, eyes wide as she stared at the mannequin's bulbous head and spindly limbs. "Mom," she whispered, "do you think it's real?" Her mother hesitated, then laughed nervously.
Just a story, honey. But the question lingered in the air, thick as the New Mexico heat. 75 years had passed since Mac Brazel stumbled upon the wreckage at Foster Ranch.
In that time, Roswell had become more than a town. It had become a myth, a Rorschach test for the world's anxieties.
The 1990s saw the explosion of the X-Files, its tagline. The truth is out there, emblazoned on T-shirts and bumper stickers.
Hollywood cashed in with blockbusters like Independence Day, where alien invaders were blown to smithereens by American grit and nuclear fire. Conspiracy theorists swapped VHS tapes of the Santilli film in basements, while skeptics penned scathing debunks in scientific journals. And the government?
They released just enough to fuel the fire. The 1994 Air Force report admitted the weather balloon story had been a lie, but only to conceal Project Mogul, a classified Cold War program. The 1997 follow-up dismissed alien bodies as misremembered parachute dummies. Each disclosure was met with fresh outrage, fresh disbelief, because the heart of Roswell wasn't about facts. It was about faith. In a diner on Main Street, an old man named James Ramirez stirred his coffee, his hands gnarled with age. He'd been a corporal at Roswell Army Airfield in '47, assigned to perimeter security the night the wreckage arrived.
"They told us not to talk," he muttered to the reporter across from him. "Swore us to secrecy. But you want to know the truth." He leaned in, his breath sour with tobacco. "I never saw a damn thing.
Just trucks coming and going, real quiet like." The reporter, a podcaster chasing the 75th anniversary angle, sighed. "So it was all nothing?" Ramirez chuckled.
"Didn't say that. Just said I didn't see it." He tapped the side of his nose. "But the boys who worked Hangar 18, they got transferred real quick. Some of them didn't last the year. Outside, a tour bus rolled past, its sides painted with cartoon aliens and flying saucers."
The podcaster shook his head. "You ever think it's all just a joke now?" Ramirez's smile faded. "Nah, jokes don't make people disappear." In Washington, a young staffer at the National Archives pulled a file marked MHIC 12 Eyes Only
from a dusty shelf. The pages inside were crisp, untouched, but every line was redacted. She snapped a photo with her phone. By morning, the image had been shared 50,000 times.
By noon, her supervisor called her into his office. By dusk, the file was gone. The legacy of Roswell wasn't in the answers. It was in the questions. The way a rancher's name could vanish from history. The way a nurse's testimony could be erased with a transfer order.
The way a government could bury the truth in plain sight, hidden beneath layers of lies so absurd they became their own kind of folklore. At sunset, the wind died down.
The UFO Museum emptied, its visitors dispersing into the neon glow of gift shops and themed cafes. Some bought alien plush toys. Others left flowers at the modest Veterans Memorial, where the names of the 509th Bomb Group were etched in stone.
And high above, a satellite passed silently over the desert, its camera lenses clicking as they scanned the empty stretch of dirt where, on us, maybe something from another world had come to rest. The truth was still out there, waiting. Or maybe, just maybe, it had never existed at all.